Long, long ago, the supreme God created this world and told the animals to descend upon it to protect the foolish young humans and guide their steps. And when the day comes that humans can stand on their own 2 feet, they are to become one with the earth, like the creatures inhabiting it, and make the world prosper. Thus, the servants of the Lord, having received the will of the supreme God, descended into the world and enriched human life, building a state for people and for themselves. This state, founded at the dawn of time, is none other than the Vistian Empire. The Count from Lexi County, capital of the Vistian Empire, was very stern. He suddenly sent his daughter to be married in the north, and the maid was very worried about her. But she told Ellie not to worry about her, because she was smart and reliable. And Milady said goodbye to her maid, and she wished her a rabbit's blessing for the road. Shaylee Lexi was 9 years old, and now she was to enter the Grey Wolf family. It was a marriage between a rabbit who knows no shame and a noble wolf. It is said that the Vistian Empire was founded by animals who were servants of God. According to this founding myth, in the imperial family of Salador, along with the noble houses of the empire, everyone reveres an animal as their ancestral deity, a symbol of their blood. Among them, the Duchy of Grey Wolf stands out, a great northern house, worshippers of the wolf, guardians of the north, known throughout the kingdom as the empire's steel blade. In comparison, the Lexi family has only accumulated wealth through trade, nothing more than a nouveau riche who bought a pedigree to break into high society. Because this family ridiculously inflated their lineage just to squeeze into high society, and Lexi County was invariably branded with the offensive nickname Shameless Rabbit. But this marriage to Grey Wolf worked in the girl's favor. It was a great opportunity to finally escape her father's grasp. And even though her future husband was only a 7-year-old boy, judging by the supposed portraits of the Duke and Duchess, he must have been a handsome man. Sheila had always wanted a younger brother, so if she took good care of him, they could have fun together, and she was looking forward to it and wondering what her husband would be like. Callie Grey Wolf and Shayla Lexi were pronounced husband and wife. They were supposed to love each other and rely on each other in everything. But one important detail bothered the bride in this ceremony. The wedding took place with only the bride, without the groom. Even though the Grey Wolves were a very noble family, and the ceremony was more than modest, the groom did not appear at all. But Sheila was also bothered by another detail. Duke Grey Wolf's gaze was very strange. The girl couldn't be entirely sure, but something was definitely wrong here. She had been told that young Lord Callion was already in his room, meaning he was alone in the bridal chamber, without even attending the wedding. But Shayla had come so far and could no longer return home. Entering the room, she saw that there was no one there. And then she smelled something, or rather, a stench. Sharp, bitter, like dried corn. But the room was clean, and it was unclear where this smell was coming from. It turned out that Callion didn't come to the wedding and wasn't in the room. The girl thought that he simply disliked her that much. She wondered why the Grey Wolf family had chosen her as a bride then, and she herself was horrified. She thought they wanted to use her as a sacrifice. Perhaps among the predator-worshipping nobles, there were still some barbaric houses that sacrificed herbivores to their ancestral gods. Perhaps her future was rabbit stew, so she needed to run away urgently. Suddenly, a strange sound came from outside. The girl guessed that it was coming from the closet. She carefully approached the door and turned the handle. Upon entering the closet, she saw a fluffy lump lying on the floor. It had its nose buried in its paws and was whimpering softly, but his sky-blue eyes were exactly like Duke Grey Wolf's. Shyla guessed that this was Callion. Although families worshipped animals as ancestral gods, there was a hidden symbol in this. In the Vist Empire, in very rare cases, mutants were born in the form of their family's sacred animal. Shyla Lexi was born a rabbit, along with her twin sister, Layla. But even in the Vist Empire, which revered animals, a nobleman openly displaying such an animal form was considered a great disgrace. And therefore, mutants born in animal form were never treated with respect. For this reason, Count Lexi always brought only Shyla, who had quickly mastered humanization, presenting her as his only daughter. The true reason why Duke Grey Wolf hastened this disadvantageous marriage was that his only heir was a mutant. At 7 years old, he was already supposed to learn to stand upright in human form, study personal dignity, and noble etiquette. But now, he couldn't even stand on 2 legs. He was just a small puppy with floppy ears. Now the girl understood why he hadn't come to the wedding. Callion was born a wolf and had not yet taken human form, but he didn't want to be looked down upon, and baring his fangs, he lunged at the girl. The Grywolf family, rooted in the northern part of the Vist Empire under the name Hemlock, preserved a history passed down from generation to generation. When demons emerged from the Hemlock Cliffs, devouring people and bringing chaos to the world, a black warrior, sent by the will of the Lord, vanquished all evil with a single sword and brought tranquility. This was the legend of the Black Wolf, a destined hero called to restore the North, an heir of the Grywolf family, born with the destiny of the Black Wolf. Callion Greywolf didn't want to be ignored. Shyla tried to explain that she wasn't ignoring him at all. She asked him not to be so harsh with her, as she herself had only been a rabbit a few years ago. Sometimes her ears still popped out when she got scared, and when she found out about this marriage, she was so surprised that her ears popped out and her father even reprimanded her for it. But even after these words, the wolf cub turned away and continued to ignore the girl. Shayla reminded him of what was said about how Northerners cherish their wives with the devotion of a gray wolf, but apparently that was a lie. But he just quietly said that he never wanted to marry. The girl wanted to know the reason for this. Was it because her family was much lower than the gray wolves? Or because her family was just a bunch of shameless rabbits? Or was it because he hated her? But the wolf cub didn't answer and just ran away. He hid in a new place and just tried to avoid answering that question. When Sheila tried to reach him, Callion screamed that this marriage was invalid. After all, he wasn't even there, and a wedding like that with one person was called a sham. It turned out that he intentionally didn't show up, so that the marriage would be considered invalid. Shyla mused aloud about how she had been shaking for a whole month in an uncomfortable carriage on her way here, all excited about the thought of marrying him, and now she had to go back. As soon as she turned to leave, Callion told her that there was a storeroom on the first floor in the East Wing. She needed to find Henry there, and he would arrange a carriage back to the capital, meaning her departure had been planned. At the time, it was unclear why a marriage proposal even needed to be sent, and after saying goodbye to Callion, the girl went out the door. At that moment, the wolf cub began to whimper. He didn't think he could have offended her with his words, but he was worried that he hadn't said goodbye. Sticking his nose out the door, he smelled that her scent was still there. And suddenly, from out of nowhere, Shayla appeared. She tried to grab the wolf cub, but it managed to run back into the dressing room. She screamed that she wasn't going anywhere, and that this was her home now. Today she let him go, but she wasn't going to return anywhere. So she asked her husband to find out. She was sure that she could easily handle a puppy like him, so there was no need for her to go anywhere. And even though the wedding was fake, the ceremony had already taken place anyway. The girl decided to stubbornly stay here and become the real power behind this ducal castle. A brave 9-year-old girl was having sweet dreams. Suddenly, she started dreaming of her father, who was scolding her, shouting that if the world found out about Layla's existence, their family would be ruined. Waking up, she realized it was just a dream, but she started worrying if her sister was all right. Seeing that the door to the room was open, Shayla realized that Callion had left in the middle of the night. At that moment, the head maid of this ducal estate, named Sandra, came to meet the girl. She helped the girl get dressed and ready, and she asked if she had happened to see Callion, but none of the maids had actually ever met him. It was very strange that even the servants in the Duke's castle had never seen Callion, and she found out whether His Grace woke up early. She came to Duke Greywolf and wanted to talk to him, because they had only met briefly during the wedding. He still exuded a cold aura. Duke Christopher Greywolf was silent and cold. He asked a servant to bring food to the table and offered Sheila to sit at the table. The girl started to worry because being near him was no joke. He had a very strong aura. The Duke ordered her to answer the questions honestly. He asked if she had seen his son last night. Sheila confirmed this, saying that his son was very sweet, and the Duke told her the same thing in response. And he also heard that she was born a mutant. But the girl remembered her father's words that no one should know about it if she didn't want to see their family fall apart because of her. Now she looked like a true lady, and Christopher asked if she understood what he was talking about. The girl understood that she had to do everything possible to help Callion become human as soon as possible. Christopher got up from the table and headed for the exit, and at that moment, the food was just being brought in. The servant complimented Shyla, saying that she was a truly remarkable little duchess, for she had understood the Duke's words at their very first meeting. His Grace had always been a man of few words. He mostly communicated with knights, and in a world of strict hierarchy, words are superfluous. Now it was time for the meal. Shyla was pleasantly surprised that chicory was prepared for breakfast for the cute bunny. Due to the mountainous terrain, northern cuisine is based more on vegetables than meat, and the girl thought she would never eat her favorite chicory again. She wondered if the Duke had ordered it to be prepared for her. Perhaps he wasn't as cold as he seemed. The person who served her such wonderful food was the head butler, Antonio Berdo. He asked the girl to simply call him Antonio. Sheila realized that the head butler, unlike the other servants, knew about Callion's condition. She decided to clarify this matter with him. But it turned out that the Duke had never restricted the young master's movements. Sheila couldn't understand why the maids said they had never seen him before. It was all because the young master himself didn't like to go outside. It turned out that, in reality, no one was threatening or locking up the boy. And, in fact, Christopher never said that if his son didn't become a human, she would lose her position as a little duchess. Now Sheila understood perfectly that she had to get closer to Callion as soon as possible. But she didn't know where to look for him. Sheila found a trace on the floor, but there was no scent. And if he wasn't in the bridal chamber, then she should check the next place. The girl asked the servants where the young master's room was in the house. But the maid Hannah warned that it was strictly forbidden to enter the young master's room without permission. Sheila insisted that she was Callion's wife and had the right to know where her husband was. Approaching the door of his room, she smelled that scent. This meant that the boy was definitely inside, but as soon as she crossed the threshold of the room, a strong smell hit her nose. The room was dark, dirty, and things were scattered everywhere. And under the bed sat a small, furry ball, its eyes gleaming. Realizing that the girl had found him, he immediately decided to hide somewhere else. But the acrid smell made Sheila start coughing, and the wolf cub yelled that he had told the girl to return to the capital. Sheila asked him to get out from under the bed, because he himself could get sick if he stayed in that room for too long. Well, he buried his muzzle in his tail and didn't want to talk to her. Suddenly, a man appeared behind Sheila and started saying that entry here was forbidden. But then, realizing that she was the young master's wife, he apologized, for he was merely a humble servant. However, she noticed that his clothes and posture resembled a hunter's more than a servant's. The man began to explain that Callion doesn't like women. He avoids all servants, but especially maids. But the young master didn't let him finish and, jumping out from under the bed with a snarl, started chasing him away. Hesitantly, the servant Henry quickly said that he needed to leave so they could talk. The boy insisted that he keep his promise, but Henry didn't know what to do now. Turning to Sheila, he explained that the young master would like her to return to the capital. Henry was indeed a hunter. He only came to the duchy to deliver supplies or clean Callion's room. The girl's departure was already quite well planned, but she understood that even if everything was so carefully prepared, when she returned, her father would simply catch her and send her back anyway. Henry said that the young master had prepared secret provisions for her. A chest of gold coins was enough for Sheila to hire servants to look after her in some quiet countryside. And if more money was needed, Callion was ready to get more. But the girl never said she agreed to leave. She was worried that the boy hated her so much. Henry tried to convince her that this was not the case at all. And in fact, the young duke grew fond of the girl. But although he didn't say so in so many words, it was obvious. After all, the young duke was indifferent to everyone and despised most people. But he looked at the girl's portrait, which Henry had shown him, for a very long time. Shyla couldn't understand why he was trying to kick her out if he liked her. The girl was unaware that in the history of the Grey Wolf ducal family, there had never been a divorce. Not once in 400 years. The Grey Wolf family was renowned for its deep loyalty. They remained loyal to their family, their wives, and the people of their domain. This lineage, though considered unwise, unlike other illustrious families, chose to remain guardians of the borders, rather than move their home to the brilliant capital. Henry, of course, couldn't claim to fully understand the young duke's intentions, but apparently, he wanted to annul the marriage as a tactful gesture so that Sheila could meet another wonderful husband. But she had no intention of looking for a better match than the heir to the dukedom. Henry began to allude to the fact that Callion was not entirely normal. The girl even started to worry and asked what was wrong with him. But the heir to the dukedom was a mutant. She had heard ad nauseum from her father's speeches about how great this rift was in the world of nobles. Sheila remembered her sister and hoped that she was well and that Ellie would take care of her. Ellie was her old friend and reliable maid, but if her father changed his mind, she didn't know what could happen to her sister. Sheila had to make the Grey Wolves her loyal allies as soon as possible, and only then could she ask for her sister to be brought here. The girl understood what Henry was telling her, but it was Callion's idea. And she herself really liked this marriage, and she absolutely was not going to return to the capital. And since the young duke didn't communicate with anyone, he was close to Henry, and Sheila asked him to help her get closer to Callion. Armed with protective gear, water, and a mop, the young lady was about to clean her husband's room. And if he was bored, he could come and watch. Her father never assigned a maid to her sister, so she cleaned her room herself, bathed her, and took her for walks. So for her, taking care of a mongrel like him would be a piece of cake, and Shayla enthusiastically began cleaning the room. But it seemed she had only been scrubbing this corner for a solid hour and was very, very tired. This room turned out to be a real torture for her. The girl went downstairs and asked Hannah for help, but Hannah was astonished by the lady's appearance. And she explained that Callion's room was incredibly messy right now, so she wanted to ask the maid for something useful for cleaning. Shayla couldn't let him continue to live in all that dust. To help the young lady, Hannah decided to give her her secret weapon, but she still wondered if the young mistress could do it all alone. Hannah's secret weapon turned out to be a special cleaning agent from Count Lexi's company. They wrote advertising slogans on each box to sell it at a high price, but the performance of this tool was really good. Having finished for the day, Shayla promised Callion to continue the next day, but the wolf cub kept saying that it was enough, and it was time for her to return to the capital. The young lady was not going to change her mind and said goodbye until tomorrow. She carried a whole mountain of trash out of the room. Hannah decided to help her a little and left notes in the places where to put dirty laundry and trash, and where there was a towel to keep her hands and face clean. After Shayla finished cleaning, Hannah suggested she take a bath. After such hard work, it was simply divine. Now she could finally get some good rest. The girl thanked Hannah for taking care of her today. After all, it was Hannah who left the cart in the hallway and prepared everything for her rest in advance, even though the young lady herself hadn't even asked for it. But the maid did it to gain favor with the young mistress, who would one day become the Duchess of House Grey Wolf. After all, everyone knew the story that every Duke of the Grey Wolf family loved his wife very, very, very much and fulfilled all her whims. Well, except for the impossible ones, so the true power would belong to the mistress. Therefore, Hannah asked Shyla not to be too grateful to her because she was a real sycophant. And she also expected the young mistress to later raise her salary, entrust her with important tasks, and help her advance. This story from the maid made the young lady laugh to tears. Hannah probably didn't know that real sycophants can only speak beautifully and don't help from the bottom of their hearts. Shyla promised that someday she would help her advance, so she had to listen carefully. The girl wanted to know what was inside Callion's room, but the maid had never been inside. Shyla saw something on the ceiling in the room, an enormous canvas stretched across the ceiling, depicting the boundless Hemlock Mountains and the demons that had emerged from them. With a sword of steel, blessed by the gods, the warrior slays demons. This was a heroic tale, famous in the north, the legend of the Black Wolf. The canvas was painted on December 1st, 1277, when Kalyan was still in the Duchess's womb. The girl asked Hannah what if she was the one from the prophecy, but she was born a mutant, and instead of a black wolf, she appeared as a white one. Shayla suggested that she would probably hide in her room, thinking that she had disappointed everyone. Hannah realized that the little lady was talking about the young master, and she wondered what Hannah would do in his place. The girl pondered and imagined herself in that situation. At this time, the wolf cub crawled out from under the bed. When Shayla cleaned up, the room looked completely different, and he wondered if it was hard for her to do it, and he didn't understand why she tried so hard for him. Suddenly, the door to the room opened slightly, and Henry appeared, offering a small bag with what the young master had asked for. Kalyan told him to leave the bag by the door, and he asked him not to argue and to do as he was told. The sack fell to the floor, and dust and dirt spilled out of it onto the floor. Kalyan was sleeping, as always, under the bed. Suddenly, in the morning, he jumped up and shouted the girl's name across the room. But this time, she wasn't in the room. This was very strange because usually she came every day. The wolf cub paced around the room in circles, wondering where Shayla had gone. He even thought she might have returned to the capital. If that were the case, he would even be glad. But suddenly, it occurred to him that Shayla, having gotten lost on the way, was not yet familiar with this place, and she could have wandered off anywhere. Kalyan rushed to the exit to save the girl. Meanwhile, Shyla was walking tiredly down the corridor. She had a lot of work that day and finished late. In the morning, she went to the inner castle with Sandra. During the day, Antonio explained the state funds to her. Then she toured the ducal estate and memorized the basic schedule of the territory. A mountain of work lay ahead, but the girl was supposed to handle it. Approaching Kalyan's bedroom, she saw that the door was open. His fur was under the bed, but where he himself had gone was unclear. And suddenly, she heard a familiar sound. It was her little wolf cub, Kalyan. But upon seeing her, he began to complain that the girl still hadn't returned to the capital. And then Shyla realized that he had gone looking for her because he thought she had left the duchy. But he tried with all his might to show that it was not so. She wanted very much to hug and kiss him, but held back, because an impulsive kiss could ruin everything. And the little lady went to clean up the room. The cleaning was almost complete. Only a little remained. The old wardrobe really should have been thrown out. It didn't suit the room at all, and was in poor condition. It couldn't be that there was still clothing inside that Kalyan could wear now. Perhaps something important was preserved within. Shayla asked Kalyan if she could open the wardrobe, but he didn't care and said she could do whatever she wanted. The girl cautiously opened the door a crack, and from there, a terrible smell of dust hit her right in the nose. If a child was born a mutant, their mother was doomed to death, so neither Shayla nor her sister ever knew their mother. Kalyona suffered the same fate, to be born and immediately lose her mother, and then bear the burden of a father's grief for her. The closet contained children's clothes, all brand new, skillfully sewn, and never worn. On the door was an inscription made by Kalyan's mother in anticipation of the baby in the winter of 1277. Looking at the bed in the boys' room, Shyla decided to stay there for the night. She lay down on the bed and covered herself with a blanket. She didn't care about any black wolf. She liked the cute little white puppy Kalyan, and no matter what anyone said, she decided to protect him. At night, the girl woke up to a strange smell. The smell was coming from the balcony, and Kalyan was sitting there, eating something. Holding her nose, Shayla came to see what her husband was eating. Kalyan, in his beast form, should have been more sensitive to smells, and it was unclear how he tolerated it. The girl started screaming for him to spit it out immediately, but taking the wolf cub in her arms, she realized that he was actually very thin, and only his fluffy fur gave the impression of plumpness. It turned out that instead of normal food, he was eating some nonsense. Kalyan had been eating ordinary garlic all this time. This is one of the spices brought from the eastern port, with a pungent smell, a sharp and bitter taste, and it was also aptly called the devil's seed. Shyla tried to find out why the boy was eating garlic, and he said that he himself asked Henry to get it, because if you ate 100, you could become human. He heard a conversation between a merchant from the east, that in a distant eastern country there was a bear who ate 100 cloves of garlic and became human. The girl tried to explain that it was all nonsense. Kalyan was worried that he had done something wrong. Perhaps he should have eaten all 100 at once, but he could only eat one a day. so he had already eaten 81 of them. The little mistress hugged the wolf cub tightly, and she said that merchants just make up such stories to sell their goods. But the boy himself thought it was a bit strange. And then the girl told him that she knew how to become human. After all, she herself was born a rabbit, and now she is human. But in reality, she didn't know it. But thanks to Count Lexi, she learned to lie. And the bigger the lie, the more emotion you put into it without a twinge of conscience. And the moment someone believes in it, the lie will become the truth. And Shyla promised that he would become human if he listened to her. She couldn't tell him about it earlier because he was always hiding under the bed, telling her to return to the capital. Now Callion wanted her to quickly tell him how to become human, but it wouldn't happen overnight. He had to follow her training step by step. The first step was to eat well. During this time, the wolf cub really missed meat very much. The girl understood that without her, it would be a catastrophe. In the morning, she announced to the Duke that she was very sorry, but from now on, he would be having breakfast alone, and she would eat with Callion in her bedroom. Taking her breakfast with her, she left the dining room. The butler expressed his opinion that the young Duchess was not like an ordinary 9-year-old girl and was a very promising person because she took a resident of the Northern Territory as her companion and personally redecorated the young Duke's bedroom. The father thought that, in the end, the marriage was not a mistake, but such a young child didn't even throw tantrums. But he noticed that the girl was in a great hurry. In Shyla's opinion, the Duke should have checked what his son was eating. The overfed wolf cub lay on the floor. The girl wanted to pick him up to check if he had gained weight, but he wouldn't let her. And then she began to assert that this was also the first step to becoming human. But the boy was already worried that she was trying to bribe him with food and then cover it up. Shyla was unhappy that he doubted such an innocent rabbit as herself. She decided to show him proof, and if he still didn't believe her, then after that, she would return to the capital. The girl asked to be called not Shayla, but Shasha. That was her nickname. In the capital, family members were supposedly forbidden to call each other by their full names. And if Callion ignores this, he will be a bad child. That's how the hierarchy began to establish itself. But the wolf cub didn't have a nickname, so he told the girl to decide what to call him herself. The young lady suggested calling him Coco, but he was strongly against it. The nickname Lily also didn't appeal to the boy. After all, he was a wolf and wanted a cool name. And then Shasha suggested naming him Lion, and he gladly agreed. And since they were now so close as to use nicknames, they should never betray each other. Now the wolf cub had to swear by his name because a big secret awaited him. Because if it got out, she could die. And Callion began to take the oath. He raised his paw, and Shasha saw how soft the pads on his paws were, and she really wanted to touch them. Now it was time to show that she was telling the truth. Clenching her fists, the girl concentrated completely and shouted something. The little wolf was very surprised by what he saw. Was it really Shasha? A small rabbit with long ears was now sitting in front of him. Callion at first couldn't believe it was true. He started running around her, joyfully shouting that Shasha had turned into a tiny rabbit. The little wolf happily ran towards her, but Sheila stopped him with her paw. Because now, being a rabbit, the situation frightened her. These huge paws with claws were like weapons, and if the sharp teeth hit her even once, she could die. But she couldn't say it aloud, because she needed to show the dignity of a leader. So the rabbit told him to keep his distance, citing the basics of manners. The wolf cub ran around her and couldn't get enough of the little rabbit that smelled of vanilla. Lion really wanted to touch her, but the girl wouldn't let him. Then he asked to at least lick her just once. After all, she smelled so nice, and her fur looked so beautiful and soft. Shyla began to show the wolf cub how to turn back into a human, and to say that you are human and possess a beautiful body and can proudly stand on 2 feet. And so Shasha became human again. But then Lion realized that she was in pain and she sat on the floor. The girl said that everything was fine. It had just been so long since her last transformation. The last time she turned into a rabbit was when she was 6 years old. Her sister was sad and wouldn't even eat her favorite broccoli, so Shyla turned into a rabbit for her. And after that, she got into a lot of trouble. and remembering that horror was very difficult. But now it was Callion's turn to try to transform. He sat on the floor and, concentrating, began to repeat that he was a human. And the puppy stood on its hind legs, but it seemed to him that he was already a human. Shyla couldn't help herself and hugged this fluffy ball. The girl told Lion that the fact of her transformation into a rabbit was a secret to everyone, and if anyone found out, she would be sold to the circus. But in the North, promises are valued more than life itself, and no matter what happens, Lion will keep his promise to Shasha. And Callion promised Shyla that he would never betray her. But Shasha couldn't rely on this chubby puppy because she was the one who was supposed to protect him. She turned to Lion. She had something to tell him, and he started wagging his tail joyfully because she had called him by his nickname for the first time. And he was very pleased by this. He jumped on the girl and started licking her. One day, Shyla began writing a letter to her nanny. She wrote that she was doing well in the north. The Hemlock Mountains were cold and harsh, but the people were kind and treated her well. But the girl had to choose her words carefully. If her father didn't like any of the phrasing, this letter wouldn't reach the nanny. And after the nanny read it, she would show the letter to Ellie. At the end of the letter, she signed off as Shayla, who always prays for the rabbit's well-being. And when Ellie reads this, she will understand the hidden meaning. This meant that the girl wanted to know if her sister was all right. If she was sick or injured, she asked to be informed, because without Shayla, she must be lonely. Her father said that if she were found, he would claim she was a pet rabbit, so he wouldn't even let her out of her cage. But Shayla really wanted to let her go. But the northern mountains are too cold, and the journey here takes a whole month. It's too dangerous for a small rabbit, and if Count Lexi finds out she's missing, chaos will ensue. The girl must become a perfect gray wolf. She must work hard until everyone needs her. Only then will Count Lexi not be able to treat her carelessly, and even if she takes her sister, he won't be able to say a word. Her thoughts were interrupted by Antonio knocking on the door. Apologizing, he asked how her relationship with the young Duke was developing. Smiling, Shayla confirmed that they were doing well. Leon was a good child, and they had become quite close. And when the girl said that he even climbed onto her lap, it simply delighted Antonio, because she was the first person the young Duke had allowed so close to him. Unfortunately, neither the Duke nor Antonio ever approached him first. It turned out that Callion really avoided everyone, and Shayla wanted to know why. Antonio said that the boy had never been sociable, but after one accident, everything got much worse. 5 years ago, when the young Duke was only 2 years old, he was kidnapped by one of the maids. Hearing this, the young lady was very surprised. The maid saw a cute puppy that looked lonely, so she took it home to shower it with love. She tied him up in her house. Since then, he began to avoid even looking at people even more, and he especially hated the maids. For this incident, she got off lightly. That maid was simply expelled from the house, all because the young Duke did not want to reveal his identity. The girl was surprised that he couldn't even say his own name. He must have hated being treated like a cute little pet dog, and saying that this wolf cub was actually the young Duke Grey Wolf was even more hateful. Antonio asked the young lady to help the young Duke become himself. Shayla decided to ask Hannah, if she were a young mutant Duke and couldn't tell people who she was, what would be the reason? Perhaps it was due to people's reactions. But if it was the young Duke Grey Wolf, the sole heir of the North, then everything was different. Because here in the North, no one would dare to mistreat young Grey Wolf. And the Duke was different from Count Lexi. At least, they didn't lock up Callion or treat him cruelly for not being a mutant. Antonio and Sandra are also kind people and will respect Callion. Now Shayla knew what the boy needed. She came to him and said that she had found the reason why he couldn't become human, and it was a lack of self-confidence. It's the belief that he can handle it himself, and believing is very important. If he believes enough, even a lie will turn into truth. First, he must lift his tail, which always hangs dejectedly without a hint of confidence. He must tell himself that he is a magnificent wolf, and no one can ignore him. And she decided to gain self-confidence by having Callion mark his territory. But he didn't know what that was. Marking territory is a declaration to the world that this space is his territory. So his confidence will grow, and he will feel freedom. After all, the boy was almost always under the bed, and if you can't be confident even in your own bedroom, then you won't be anywhere else either. Now they had to teach the wolf cub to mark his territory. To do this, Shasha once again transformed into a rabbit. Lion really liked her in this form, and he couldn't control his emotions. So this time, she had to give in and let him sniff her. By the smell, he determined what she had for lunch, and Callion himself smelled of meat. The wolf cub could tell by the smell that she had eaten chicory. Shasha loved it very much, and Lion decided that he was starting to like it too. But the girl asked him not to make her laugh with such things, and she didn't even notice when the wolf cub licked her. Such an act by Lion made her very angry. Now he had to carefully watch the rabbit and learn to take the correct position and pee. The wolf cub was bewildered by this, and Shasha couldn't understand what was so difficult about it. But Lion didn't want to repeat it after her. He wanted to do it when he was alone. Shasha understood that forcing him wasn't the best idea, so she agreed with him. Now she was asking him to at least straighten his tail a little, and she also allowed him to sniff her. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, and Shyla became a girl again. It was Antonio, and he asked if the young duke was with her, and asked permission to come in for a minute. Antonio looked around a bit, and the young lady asked if everything was all right. She understood that he might have come to check on the situation with Callion on the duke's orders, and she had to show that she was doing a good job. And once again, she clarified that they were here together with the young duke. But turning around, she saw that he was nowhere to be found. Perhaps he had managed to slip onto the terrace in such a short time. Antonio decided to leave, and said he was looking forward to seeing both of them next time. And he never said why he came. Suddenly, Shyla felt a powerful stench, and now she understood why Leon had run away. He just marked his territory and ran off. First, he decided to do it under the bed, and Shasha praised him for his work. She wanted to hug the wolf cub, but then decided she shouldn't think about how cute he was, and she restrained herself and didn't hug him. But Lion noticed this and was very upset. After all, last time she petted him a lot and even gave him a little kiss, but today she didn't touch him at all. Lion was very sad about this and decided that she didn't like him anymore. But Shayla thought that he only liked her when she turned into a rabbit. Callion tried to convince her that this wasn't true. Shasha, in the form of a little rabbit, was so small, so he thought he should protect her. But she believed it was all because she smelled delicious to him. The girl screamed that he wanted to eat her. Lion, with tears, said that he never wanted to eat Shasha. He just really, really liked her. Even if the girl was in a rabbit form, she was still a human, and so was he. So he didn't even think of doing anything barbaric. They hugged tenderly and made up. Lion asked if she really considered him human, even seeing that he couldn't transform. Hugging him even tighter, Shayla replied that of course he was a human and would soon definitely become a handsome boy. She even compared him to an uncut diamond, but the wolf cub didn't know what that was. And Shasha showed him a precious stone on her clothes and explained that they weren't beautiful jewels from the beginning. They were just special pebbles. But a master was found who recognized this special pebble and polished it to reveal the jewel within. And a special person can become a jewel, just like an uncut diamond. And right now, Lion is an uncut diamond, and Shasha is that very master. But the wolf cub was worried that he wouldn't be able to become a jewel. Shasha believed that in such a case, it would be the master's fault. And in that case, she would become an alchemist. After all, an alchemist can turn even a worthless pebble into a jewel, and she promised that she would definitely make him shine. Lion admired how smart and cool Shasha was. In fact, she had read about it in books, because they held the answers to all questions. The young duke was impressed that the girl could also read, as he couldn't boast of such a skill. Now he wanted even more to become human, to become a smart boy worthy of Shasha. Since Shayla had made him cry, she decided to give him special permission to lick her just once. But at the same time, she asked him not to touch her ears for anything, and he shoved her head almost entirely into his mouth. After that, he slept peacefully in his place. Shasha wondered how such a small wolf cub could shed so much. She was also bothered by the pathetic mat Callion slept on. She wanted to at least wash it, but was afraid he would sleep on the bare floor if she threw it away. Pulling the mat towards herself, she said she wanted to tidy up a bit, and she saw a ring lying on the floor. When Shayla heard about the marriage from Count Lexi, she was given the opportunity to choose a wedding ring, but the size of the ring didn't seem to matter at all. She hoped the groom would like the ring and think of her eyes every time he looked at it. Since the size of the ring wasn't important, the girl suggested making it bigger so they could wear it together when they grew up. Now she understood that no matter what size the ring was, it still wouldn't fit on this puppy's paw. Most likely, Callian kept it somewhere safe so as not to lose it. But for now, Shasha decided to hold on to it herself. She decided to come up with a way for Callian to carry the ring with him. Late in the evening, the girl decided to go to the library, but the caretaker was no longer there, and she didn't know how to get inside. And suddenly, she saw a small crack in the wall. In the form of a rabbit, she had to squeeze through there. And indeed, for the little rabbit, it turned out to be as easy as pie. But then she saw the Duke standing before her. She was so used to playing with Callian in rabbit form that she completely forgot that transforming in public was forbidden. She worried that the Duke recognized her and would now kick her out. And if the engagement was broken, she would have to face her father again. But the Duke suddenly turned around and left without a word, although she thought their eyes met. Without wasting any time, Shyla quickly ran behind the bookshelves to transform back. In any case, she blamed Callian for everything because he was constantly looking at her with those sparkling eyes, and she was too used to showing off. She needed to get smarter, but first, she had to teach Callian how to read. On one of the shelves, she saw a wolf edition on understanding wolves. From this book, Shyla learned that a wolf's tail usually hangs down, but she made Callian raise his tail, and that was a mistake. And also that there are brown, red, and black wolves, but most of them are gray and mottled. And a wolf's fur color can also change as it grows, which means her husband could also become a black wolf later. It was already very late, and the girl wanted to sleep. She put a bookmark in the book so she wouldn't forget where she stopped reading. Turning into a rabbit, she got out the same way. Duke Grey Wolf was in the library all this time. He took down from the shelf the very book that the young lady had been reading. Opening it, he saw a bookmark made of fresh clover inside. Shyla had prepared the book for her personal finances and given it to Antonio to look at. It was a real ledger, and neither the butler nor the Duke had asked her to keep it. But the young lady decided that it would be better in the long run to keep clear, economical records of how thrifty she was, and that way no one could accuse her of extravagance. Antonio was extremely surprised that the girl knew the difference between spending and expenses. She knew for sure that expenses were desired things that you didn't necessarily need, or money that didn't have to be spent. And costs were necessary expenditures that couldn't be avoided. For example, the cost of redoing Callion's bedroom, or the money for the lamb chops she bought him. Shyla came from a merchant family, and for her, such things were elementary. Antonio asked if they were still getting along with the young master, and Shyla said that lately she had been teaching him to read, and he was picking it up very quickly. The butler was very happy with this news, because no one had ever managed to teach the young master anything before. Perhaps in the future, she will be able to lure the young master out of his bedroom. Antonio asked the young lady for a favor. He would like to create an opportunity for the young master to appear in public as the Duke's heir. But after the young Duke had a falling out with his wet nurse, who loved him as her own, no one could wash him. The wet nurse left 5 years ago. It turned out that the unpleasant smell Shyla noticed from Callion was because he didn't wash himself. And Antonio decided to bother Milady with this question. She agreed, although it wasn't very pleasant to first clean and now bathe. Lion joyfully met the girl in the room. Shasha noticed that he waited for her closer and closer to the door every day and asked if he was going to go out into the hallway soon. Stroking the wolf cub, she asked what he had been doing all day, and she suggested going to rub him clean, or rather, wash him. Lion asked again what she was going to do, as if he hadn't heard her, and the girl joyfully offered to wash him until he sparkled. But the wolf cub immediately moved away from her, and turning around, sat on the other side of the room. Shayla asked why he had gone so far from her, and he replied that he just wanted to sit there. The girl understood that he was naturally lying, and in doing so, he was simply trying to escape, and he just closed his eyes with his paws. Shasha decided to be honest with him, and said that he was cute even when dirty, but he really stank already, and she was not joking about this at all. Besides, all that dirt in his fur wasn't good for him, but he closed his eyes and started running. He didn't care about it, and he didn't want to swim. After all, she already thought he was cute, and that was enough for him. Suddenly, the wolf cub realized he had done something wrong. Lion kicked the young lady with his paw as he tried to run away. The girl screamed that she knew he hated bathing, but how could he hurt her? Shasha cried a lot out of resentment. To make amends, Lion agreed to take a bath and kept his promise to his wife. He was so dirty that the soap barely lathered. The water that ran off his fur was black with dirt. And they agreed that from now on, he would wash regularly to smell good, not stink. He was ready to do anything to make Shasha happy. She noticed that he was surprisingly calm during the bath, while her sister always felt pain when she washed her. Rabbits shouldn't be washed with water, but my sister always wanted to do what people do. She was so demanding, and it was quite troublesome. Lion was still worried about hitting her with his paw and asked her to show him where it hurt. Shasha admitted that it didn't actually hurt and she was pretending. Hearing this, the wolf cub calmed down and stopped worrying. Lion promised that from now on he would be more careful and stop moving so abruptly. Because Shasha was so soft and pliable, she could easily get hurt, and he hadn't understood that before. Antonio reported to the Duke that Milady got along wonderfully with the young master. Although before this, all the tutors had been tormented by the young master. They were threatened, driven away, and even bitten. But now, Milady had taught him to read, and she had even bathed him a few days ago. And she promised that she would definitely make sure he attended the banquet in honor of the hunting festival, because it is the biggest celebration in the north. Antonio reported that they intended to prepare a place for the young master at this banquet. Although, if he were the type to just show up because he was told to, his wedding wouldn't have been such a disaster. But the butler was sure that with the help of Milady, everything would be different, because she is wise and thrifty. Shayla was doing well, although at first, His Highness was not thrilled with her family. An order from shameless rabbits meant nothing to the Duke, and his son, in his condition, couldn't be picky about this marriage. But there was something that the Duke truly disliked. In any case, Shyla Lexi was the one Callion chose, even though he didn't even know he would end up marrying the girl from the portrait. From the very beginning, he had few options. In this case, it was better not to worry about the family's name or honor, and instead find a partner whom Callion would truly like. Lexi, the head of the family, called his daughter a first-class commodity, a rather useful product. Even then, Duke Greywolf thought that this was not something one should say about their own daughter. Count Lexi said that Shyla had grown up graceful, but to understand that, one observation of her behavior was enough. Apparently, he had to put a lot of pressure on her to turn her into a first-class commodity. The Duke couldn't understand how a 9-year-old child kept accounting books, and things like lace or perfume should be classified as adornments for a noble lady. After all, money is meant to uphold their dignity. And the fact that Shyla is still wandering around in rabbit form is a minor problem, at least compared to Callion, and Duke Greywolf gave the order to begin preparations for the banquet. Antonio clarified that since they had a new family member, should they also send an invitation to Miss Blanchy? Blanchy, the adopted daughter, married the same year Callion was born, and now lived in Count Piggy's house. The Duke agreed, but reminded him that he no longer belonged to the Grey Wolf house. But he asked Antonio to make sure that guy came. There were questions he needed to clarify with him on this occasion. After the next hunting festival, the young Duke would turn 8, the age when he would receive the Call of the Moon, a very important stage for men of the North. Upon arriving at Leon's, Shasha noticed that something was wrong with him, and she asked what had happened to him because he was very sad. But he only replied that he was fine, although it didn't seem so. The girl suggested that he wanted a break from studying or was feeling unwell. If he was sick, then she needed to call a doctor. But he was worried because he didn't know when he would be able to become human. After all, he did everything Shasha told him to do. He ate well, marked his territory, learned to write, read books, but I was still in this form. He also wanted to become human as soon as possible, just like Shasha. The girl encouraged him, saying that he was making great progress towards it. And also, to become human, patience was important. If you endure and wait, you will one day be rewarded. The girl somewhat understood Lion's feelings. Quite a lot of time had passed since she stopped being a rabbit and became human, and perhaps she had forgotten what it was like to be a mutant. She had already decided to stop turning into a rabbit, but decided to do it one last time. While no one was around, she turned back into a rabbit. From this angle, the world seemed enormous, and all the adults were too big, which was very frightening. Shyla decided to imagine that she could no longer turn back into a human. In such a situation, what would scare her most is that no one would recognize her. Well, if everyone recognized Callian, there was no reason to be scared. In fact, the most important thing is for everyone to accept him as he is now, even if he can't immediately return to human form. If everyone cares for the current Callian, then Shasha would want Callian to learn to love himself too. While she was lost in thought, she transformed back into a human. And at that moment, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed she wasn't alone on the street. An astonished maid had witnessed her transformation. Approaching her, the young lady asked what she had seen, but she just waved her hands and screamed that she hadn't seen anything and wouldn't tell anyone anything. Shyla took her hand and pulled her along. She had definitely decided that she would never turn into a rabbit again. The girl sat Hannah at the table and offered her to eat everything that was there. After that, she wanted the maid to tell her exactly everything she had seen. She said that she had indeed seen the young lady turn into a charming rabbit. Hannah said it was so cute that she couldn't help but follow her. She believed that such a charming transformation could not be hidden. Shayla promised to show herself to her again in the form of a rabbit if she kept it a strict secret. She turned around again with the rabbit and let the maid pet her. Hannah gently took her in her arms and hugged her. She couldn't imagine that the young lady was actually a mutant and thought about how difficult it must have been for her all this time. Shayla said that she still had a sister back at Lexi's house. After all, she was so worried about her. Hannah understood her perfectly because she also used to live with her younger brother every day. But when she came to the duchy, they were separated. And now she couldn't see him as often as before and missed him very much. Hannah's touch was very gentle and pleasant. It was a pity that not everyone was as kind as she was. Shayla wanted everyone to look at her sister and Callian with the same love. The girl came to the young duke's room. She hugged him and said that now she just wanted to take care of him because he should have known how charming he was. At this time, evil forces were watching the Duchy of Greywolf. In the morning, Shayla decided to ask Hannah a question. She wanted to know what would happen if, at the next hunting festival banquet, the young lord appeared in his wolf form. Perhaps people would be shocked. Hannah confirmed that most people would probably be surprised. The girl was afraid that people would suddenly laugh at him and Lion would be hurt, but the maid tried to convince her that this would not happen. If anyone dared, she would step forward and shout for them to show respect to Lord Callian Greywolf, the proud heir of the North. And then, the young lord would agree. Shayla really hoped he would say her name with pride. Hannah was sure that's exactly what would happen. At that moment, Sandra had already come for the young lady. Together with Sandra and Hannah, the girl was to visit the northern outer castle. Together they inspected the outer castle and market fortress squares. Shyla tried to carefully examine every corner. After all, as a young duchess, she should know how people live. And during the hunting festival, the streets are even livelier. Soon, people will start preparing for the long winter. And in the capital at this time, it was the season of Thanksgiving. Sandra heard that Hannah would like to visit the capital one day, and Shyla promised her to go together when the chance arose. Sandra decided to wander around the market a bit more and then wait for everyone in the carriage, suggesting to Milady that she take a walk with Hannah. And a good idea came to the girl's mind. Together with Hannah, she went to the jewelry workshop, and she decided to remake Leon's ring into a necklace so he could wear it. Shayla roughly showed Hannah the size of the young lord's neck. She measured everything with a ruler to avoid mistakes and show it to the master. But it would still be great if Lion could also come here. Getting some fresh air and seeing the city would do him good. And if he were here, Shayla would introduce him to Hannah. After all, she became a true friend to her. Shayla asked if she wanted to buy something for herself, but the girl started to refuse. Shayla offered to buy her something from the store's assortment, but Hannah couldn't accept such an expensive gift. Then the young lady offered to receive a gift in exchange for even greater secrecy of her secret. She started showing the maid all sorts of cute little things. Having chosen nothing, they decided to come back later. Hannah also wanted to give something to Milady. Shayla, it turns out, didn't know about the hidden restaurant in their castle, and Hannah rushed there to buy the girl a snack. Shyla was afraid that if she returned to the carriage alone, Sandra would scold the maid. The girl was very curious about what Hannah would buy and decided to wait for her outside. But suddenly, an alarm sounded from the bell tower. Everyone ran from the street, and Shyla didn't understand what was happening. Everyone around was shouting that Deimos had appeared. Beyond the Hemlock Cliffs lies the kingdom of Ash, where a cruel demonic army commands the beasts of destruction, and those serving in it were demons. Shyla watched them as if mesmerized. Hannah ran up and threw a bag of food at the demon, and that distracted him for a second. She grabbed Milady's hand and shouted that they needed to run. Sandra was already waiting for them on the carriage steps. She grabbed Shayla's hand and pulled her into the carriage. But turning around, the girl saw that Hannah hadn't managed to jump into the carriage, and the demon grabbed her with its claws. The girl looked at what was happening as if it were madness and didn't want to believe it. She wanted to run out after her friend, but Sandra stopped her. The carriage sped away, and Shayla kept screaming that Hannah hadn't had time to get in. She was left there with Deimos, and they had to save her. Milady started to wail and beg Sandra to come back, but Sandra just quietly whispered that Hannah was already dead. Shyla couldn't believe those words. The kingdom of Ash, where a cruel demonic army commands the beasts of destruction. To somehow calm the lady, Sandra said that when a child dies in the north, it is believed that they go to play in the mountain valleys of Hemlock and are reborn as a beautiful wildflower. And Hannah is undoubtedly happily playing with her friends now. But there's no need to call her too loudly, because a soft, dreamlike chime of bells can be heard from afar. And then Shilu was overcome with horror. Hannah screamed that she was a coward, called her friend, and let her die. And she died because of her, because she just stood there like an idiot, that she ruined everything, and it's all because of her. Shyla woke up in terror in the middle of the night. Leon asked if she was okay. Because of what happened, the girl couldn't hold back her tears. Leon licked her tears, and she was glad it was just a dream. In the middle of the night, Lion himself came into the girl's room without waiting for her. She was so out of sorts after that incident that she couldn't even see him. She definitely couldn't have dreamed of such a thing, but she still didn't want to believe it had happened. She was crying because her friend had died. Leon lay down next to her and began to comfort her. He asked her not to cry, because it made him sad too. The young lady tried to convince the wolf cub that she wasn't crying, and that only little ones like him cry. But when Lion licked the girl's cheek, he could definitely taste the salty flavor of her tears. Shasha started scolding him and demanding that he stop. And at that moment, she realized that he had grown and become quite heavy. He wanted to get off so as not to bother her, but Shasha asked him to sleep with her like that. Lion stayed because he wanted to do everything she told him to. In the morning, the young lady woke up to the bright sun, and feeling something soft and fluffy under the blanket, she got very scared. Then she remembered that she and Lion had fallen asleep together. The boy asked if she was all right now, and at that moment, Shasha noticed that his had already started to stand up straight. They were both very happy because it was proof that Lion was growing big and strong, and it was all thanks to Shyla. At this time, the Duke returned to the castle. His wounds looked terrible, and Antonio said they needed to be treated first. The raids were becoming more frequent, and of all times, this had to happen when the young lady was in the village. Antonio said that Shayla was fine, but it must be hard for her, as she had lost a close maid. The knightly order was not trained in vain. They would not give up easily, even to the infamous demonic corps. However, the demonic beasts they commanded were a problem, as each demos possessed terrifying combat power. 30% of the knightly forces were deployed and barely managed to destroy 3 demos, but the 2 that escaped were never caught. This was strange. Until now, all demos had attacked like mad beasts. This was the first instance of an escape. Just thinking about it, they could run, hide, and launch surprise attacks. And if their intelligence continued to grow, it was unclear how long they could resist them. The legend of the Black Wolf, who single-handedly descended into the Hemlock Mountains and defeated a demos with one sword, was perhaps invented to instill hope. And it was unclear whether Lion was the hero of the prophecy. The new maid was combing Shyla's hair and saying that she seemed special. but she was worried because she didn't know for sure what had happened to Hannah. The maid said that the girl most likely died. They said that Demos had devoured several villagers, and the joint funeral even included those whose bodies could not be found. Shyla looked at the maid with annoyance and told her that she could be free. As she left, the girl wished Milady a good rest. The new maid was Jessica Mallory, daughter of the local Viscount's family from the north, but no one could fill the void left by Hannah. When she left, Lion peeked out from behind the curtain. Shasha said he shouldn't hide because no one would dare say anything bad to him, and those who dared, she would punish, because the boy couldn't spend his whole life hiding. But Lion hated the way other people looked at him, and he hated it when other people knew it was him. One of the maids informed her that the Duke was waiting for Milady in his chambers. Shasha asked if Lion wanted to go to the Duke with her, but he said nothing to her in response. When the young lady entered the room, the Duke was lying on the bed, bandaged. The girl saw that he was in a lot of pain. The Duke said that he had received treatment and would soon recover. Antonio decided to tell her something. This was information about the Kingdom of Aja, located north of the Hemlock Mountains. Recently, an incident of royal usurpation occurred in the Kingdom of Aja, and two powerful families have been fiercely competing with each other ever since. The powerful matriarchal Veramos family, which had produced queens 5 times, and the royal Aja, barely holding on due to its legitimacy. The Veramos family sent one of their blood relatives to the royal family as an adopted son, and he, having changed his surname, gained legitimacy and emerged victorious. The new king, Helgot Aja, a man bearing the royal surname, but a full-fledged Veramos. Up until now, all attacking Demos had fled the Kingdom of Aja from their breeding grounds, but this time, it was different. This was a planned attack. While pursuing the escaped Demos, the Duke and his knights saw a high-ranking knight of the demonic army. It seemed he was observing their movements, the Grey Wolf Knight Order, and the situation in the north. Now that their internal problems were resolved, they must have turned their gaze outward. To change the subject, the girl said that Leon was a really fast learner and very smart. It's hard to concentrate in his beast form, but he's making great progress. He's steadily growing, but for now, only one of his ears has perked up. Shiloh wished the Duke a speedy recovery, and he asked her not to go outside unnecessarily. She had only arrived in the north a few months ago, and today she heard the news that a war might break out. At this time, Sandra was watching from around the corner. She tried to understand what Jessica was doing in my lord's room. The girl tried to open the door to his room, but Sandra stopped her, grabbing her hand. She sharply asked the girl what she was doing there. After all, it was Milord's room, and he didn't want anyone to go in there except Milady. Jessica pretended that she had simply entered the wrong room. Sandra asked her not to make such a mistake again. But Jessica left thinking about how that little brat could have done that to her. A funeral ceremony was taking place in the village. Shyla mentally asked Hannah to forgive her. She wished her to find peace there and to be reborn as a wildflower in the next life. The sun was about to set, and it was time to return to the ducal castle. For a second, Shyla thought she saw the shadow of a Deimos. This frightened her very much. A moment later, this vision was gone. Turning around, she saw a puppy behind her. He joyfully wagged his tail and stuck out his tongue. And then he even rolled onto his back in front of her. People giggled at how comically he was begging for the young lady's attention. And he really wanted her to pet him. Shyla really wanted Lion to have as much confidence. That would truly be wonderful. Upon returning to the castle, Shyla saw that the food in front of the door was still untouched. Opening the door, she asked why Lion still hadn't eaten. Well, he was just hiding again. He was scared because many people were walking outside the door, and he hated it when other people looked at him and knew it was him. Shasha tried to explain that he should eat even if she wasn't around, but suddenly he smelled a strange scent on her hand. This smell was very unpleasant to him. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, and at the threshold stood one of the servants with that very puppy in his arms. Lion didn't like any of this at all, and he pounced on the puppy. Lion chased away the uninvited guest so he wouldn't dare touch Shasha. Shyla barely managed to hold back the little wolf, and suddenly, Lion said he would kill that puppy. This was not the Lion she knew. Suddenly, the servant grabbed a mop and tried to drive Lion away, calling him a mischievous spirit. But the young Duke ordered him to leave. Shyla couldn't understand what she had just heard, and Lion continued, baring his teeth and chasing the servant away, and he didn't stop until the man disappeared around the corner. And only then did he realize that Shasha had seen it all. He became sweet and kind again, and he offered her to touch his paw. Judging by the servant's reaction, Lion even attacked the maids in the Duke's mansion, and he also tried to bite a tiny puppy. Perhaps Lion was only a good boy when he was with Shyla. Shasha asked if he had a bite mark, but he remained silent, which meant he did. Lion made excuses, saying he would never bite her. He didn't need anyone but her, but he was very upset that she touched that puppy, seeing it almost as a betrayal. And then he played the cutie again in front of Shasha. He tried to justify himself, saying that she herself had said he was a sweetheart. Shayla couldn't believe that she had been led on all this time, and that Leon definitely deserved to be an actor. She asked him to promise that he wouldn't bite anyone or threaten anyone again. And he also shouldn't bite puppies that are smaller than him, or say mean things. Most of all, Shasha hated cruel people, and if he did that again, she would hate him. Shasha asked him to keep his promise and make a pinky promise, and Lion made her such a promise. Now, it turned out that getting Lion out of the bedroom wasn't the only problem. He needed to learn to live with others. Shyla finished embroidering a beautiful wolf, but suddenly, the vision of the demons reappeared before her eyes. She was in complete horror and bewilderment, but these were just maids admiring her work. They had never seen such delicate patterns before. It was an adaptation of a popular pattern in the capital. When Shyla was little, her father considered embroidery skills to be the most important ability for a lady and constantly made her practice it, even though she was clumsy with her hands. One of the maids asked where the young lady would use this embroidery, and Shyla replied that it would be for a pillowcase, and then give it to Lion. She was very pleased that she could do something for him. The maids started whispering, as it wasn't entirely clear who was being talked about. No one had ever seen the little Duke Grey Wolf. Some said he was bedridden due to illness, while others claimed he was a mutant. This wolf was seen appearing near the clock tower at night, and Shyla was a girl who had come from afar to marry a beast. Dotting all the I's, the young lady announced to the maids that Lion was indeed a wolf, and he was also a very intelligent, reliable, and proud husband. Coming to Lion, the girl said that she had thought some things over. She wanted others to acknowledge how proud she was of Lion. He may have looked like a wolf, but he's the most wonderful husband. Shyla wanted them to overcome this together. From that day on, Leon stayed under the bed, never coming out. He didn't eat, not at all, just like before. Shyla tried to pull him out from under the bed, but he refused to come out. She forcefully pulled him out by his paws. Lion whimpered that he also didn't want to be born this way, but wanted to be big and strong like Henry and the great hero. But Shyla was absolutely against it. If the wolf looked like Henry, she would never have married him. Because she loved the little and charming puppy, he was so cute that she could even put up with him teasing and mocking her. But in reality, he didn't want to tease his Shasha, and she could hardly find another puppy as cute as him. She liked Lion very much. And then he asked how much. And laughing, the girl replied, __quote _0 ___. Then it turned out that he was also her favorite, like a treat. At first, Shyla simply didn't want to return to the capital, so she decided she needed to become someone important to the young Lord Callian. But now, she just wanted to be with him. And he also said that he loved her as Chicory. In any case, he had to keep his promise and never again walk on the roof in the middle of the night or attack passers-by. She still remembered how shocked she was when she first found out. It seems she was heading towards Henry then. You chose such dangerous routes just to avoid people. From that moment on, she asked him to become the proud and dignified young Lord Callian Greywolf. If that was what Shasha wanted, then Lion would be willing to do it. Now he was on patrol, because he already wanted that disgusting dog to approach Shasha. He couldn't let anyone else capture Shasha's attention, and suddenly, Lion saw his reflection. He had indeed changed a lot, and he no longer looked like he did in childhood, and not even like their first meeting with Shasha. Lion heard talk that when he was little, he looked pathetic like a puppy, but over time it became unsettling to look at the animalistic face that spoke human words. Because of these words, he broke the mirror with his reflection. But Henry brought him a new mirror, and then he realized that the man was deceiving him. The mirror was an expensive blizzard, and a simple gardener could not have afforded it, which meant he was talking about Lion with the butler. Ironically, it was through espionage that Henry Lion met Shasha. That arrogant fool shamelessly laid out the portraits right in front of him. Henry said he was involved in supplying portraits, and he saw that one of the portraits had caught the wolf's attention. It was precisely the portrait of Shyla Lexi. Even then, Lion considered her an angel in the flesh. At that time, the young Duke truly had no idea that such an intention was hidden behind Henry's actions, and that in the end, Lion would marry the girl from the painting. But now he tormented himself, believing he had ruined everything and buried the life of such a beautiful young lady along with his own, forcing her to marry a useless, absurd wolf like him. Even the nanny hated him. In the end, everyone just ran away, scared to death. But Shasha was so foolish. She still called him sweet, hugged and kissed him. She said she loved him as much as Chicory. He didn't know why she liked something so coarse and dirty, but if Shasha liked them, then he would try to love them too. Shyla came into Lion's room with a gift. The girl was dreaming that she was being chased away like a witch, and she was trying to protect a small wolf cub. She frantically called out for Hannah and Sandra. She was very scared, but for some reason, they didn't answer. And suddenly, Jessica said that they were probably all dead. After all, the Deimos had devoured several people in the village. There were also joint funerals for those whose bodies could not be found. But the young Duke's body was found. At that moment, Shayla woke up in a sweat. Soon, the long northern winter began. The girl decided to tell Lion about this dream. Now it was time to focus on the operation to make Leon confident, and she called him to go for a walk. But he wasn't going anywhere, and she didn't know how to get him out of the room. But she had her secret ways. She promised to give him a peck if he decided to come out. From his look, it was clear that he knew she would kiss him anyway, even if he didn't come out. And then the girl said she would kiss that homeless puppy they saw last time. It worked, and the wolf decided to leave the room. The weather was beautiful outside, and she called him to the garden. But Leon was worried that everyone would stare at him there. Then suddenly, one of the servants greeted the young Duchess and the young Duke, and Leon did the same in return. They finally went out into the garden. Shasha praised him very much for it. Antonio noticed the children playing in the garden and called the Duke to look at this scene. The young Duke and Duchess were happily running around the garden. Antonio never thought this day would come. The Duke also noticed that his son had grown considerably since their last meeting. And no matter how this child looked, he was the heir. Shasha gave him a bath day because his fur had become completely gray. But for some reason, his fur did not change color even after bathing. Perhaps it was all because Lion had grown up, but when he slept with his tongue out, she couldn't think of him as anything but a little puppy. She placed the pillow she was embroidering under his head. Even in his sleep, Lion was searching for his ring and asking for it back. But Shash was very afraid to return to the village, and she decided to do it when it got warmer. The wolf couldn't stop admiring the pillow his wife had given him, and now he could even read the words she had embroidered on it. He really loved it when she bathed him. Her touch was very gentle. The shampoo the nanny used was awful because it was made from monster flesh. But she said he had to wash with it to become human, but he was still a wolf. But as long as Shasha liked him, he was willing to remain even a wolf. He proudly bore the name Callion Grey Wolf, Shasha's lion. Suddenly, he caught her scent. Shasha was sleeping here on the bed in his room, but she was crying in her sleep and kept saying that she needed to protect him. He started licking her face, trying to calm her down. And suddenly, he heard that she had to protect not only him, but also his sister. They continued their daily walks, and Leo no longer hesitated before them. Now he himself would wake Shasha up so she would walk with him. And now he always slept on the pillow she made for him. But if she had to choose between Chicory and Leon, the wolf was sweeter and the chicory was tastier. But just in case, the girl tasted the wolf and said that he was very, very tasty. But after that, she really wanted some chicory. No one in the duchy flinched anymore when they saw Leon, and Leon had gotten used to seeing people. Perhaps now they could start venturing out even further. Leon was a very sweet wolf, and anyone would think he was the most beautiful creature in the world. This time, Sandra went to the village with them, and Shasha reminded Leon to calmly look around as they trained. But the people in the village, upon learning that it was the Duke, spoke of him as huge and terrifying. Sandra stood up for him, shouting at the people to show at least some respect for the ducal family. But the wolf behaved surprisingly calmly and well, and the girl praised him for it. They finally reached the jewelry store they were looking for. A necklace was ready there, not only for the young Duke, but also for Hannah. Shayla asked Sandra to send this piece of jewelry to Hannah's home, hoping they would accept at least this. Lion asked who Hannah was, and the young lady said she was her friend. He became worried that she might be closer to her than to him, but the girl, with sadness in her voice, replied that Hannah was no longer there. Shasha wanted to return the ring to her husband, but now the chain was too small for him. She was surprised that the wolf had grown so much during that time. Upon hearing about the necklace for the wolf, Henry laughed very hard. But the young Duchess explained that she simply wanted to hang the ring around her husband's neck, but if he continued to grow, there was no point in her ordering a new one. But seeing that it was an engagement ring, Henry agreed that the girl had made the right decision, and he said that there was no point in going to a jeweler for this, because he had something better. He had an ox-hide collar, very strong. He thought it would be much better this way, but Leon was not thrilled with the idea. Shasha believed that gold was the only suitable option for the young Duke, but Henry insisted that this collar was of the best quality in the duchy, and he asked him to trust him just this once. After putting on the collar, Leon asked his wife for her opinion, and she replied that it looked great on him and suited him very well. The wolf was very happy to hear this. Now he could always carry the ring with him and never take it off. This was his third treasure. His second treasure was his favorite pillow, and Shasha herself was the first treasure. Since they were now going to the village together, Henry asked if they were going to the mountains and the river. Shasha reminded him that the hunting festival begins in spring. This time, she wanted to go to the banquet with her husband, but Henry was very skeptical about this event. Lion thought that if he went to this event, terrible things would be said about Shasha, and he said that Henry was right, and he wouldn't go anywhere. Shasha asked what was wrong, and why he had made such a decision. After all, he could already go out freely, and then he realized that his beloved wife was upset because of this, and he needed an excuse that wouldn't hurt her feelings. And he started saying that it was all because of ghosts. After all, during the hunting festival, ghosts crawled everywhere in dead animals, and a small puppy like him could be eaten. But Henry started to make excuses, saying he was just joking when the wolf cub was the size of a pea. Even now, he didn't look much like a puppy, and if you brought him, even horses would tremble. And Shayla asked Henry to say that ghosts don't exist, because Lion believed his every word. But the wolf continued to insist that he had indeed seen a ghost. Shasha felt very sorry for him, but promised to take him to the banquet no matter what. Now she didn't know what to do. Lion understood that ever since he said he wouldn't go to the banquet, his wife had been in despair. But restrictions on kissing, that was too cruel. He remembered that on the first day they went for a walk, she kissed him about 30 times. But yesterday, there were only 10 kisses. Lion saw the reason as him having grown up, and now being neither small, nor white, nor fluffy, or because he still hadn't become human. And he said that he had seen the ghost again, who was just standing and looking at him. It was the ghost of a large tiger, but these animals were not hunted on the hunting farm. But Leon remembered that one had been caught a long time ago. Shasha reassured him, saying that ghosts eat puppies, and he is a human. He no longer even knew if he wanted to be human. His heart was definitely human, but his wife liked him as a little puppy, and she kept trying to persuade him to go to the banquet. The wolf flatly refused. Suddenly, a feeling overcame him that wouldn't leave, no matter how far he ran. It was the urge to walk on 2 legs, and the urge to hug his wife with both arms. Lion was becoming scared by all the thoughts in his head. Turning around, he saw the girl running after him. She started scolding him for running out into the cold and dark. Now he clearly saw that she loved him very much. Because of the ghosts, he started sleeping with her in the bed, but it made the girl very hot. They received many letters, and Shasha began to read them aloud. Suddenly, among the letters, she saw a letter from home, and what was written there horrified her. Her sister was terribly ill, but her father waited, pretending everything was normal. The milady was selling necklaces and bracelets to pay for medicine, but she wasn't getting any better. Ellie asked her to send some money to the city bank, and Shasha explained that Ellie was her maid in the capital, and the rabbit mentioned in the letter is her sick sister. Shiloh was very worried about her sister, and Lion was worried because his Shasha was crying. He tried to comfort her as best he could, but she just wouldn't stop crying. Lion even agreed to go to this banquet, but the girl blamed herself for her sister getting sick because she left her alone. And now the wolf understood why she was crying. Shyla decided to urgently go to the capital. She had to take care of her sister and couldn't return. But the wolf couldn't allow that and offered to transport her sister to the north. This idea brought her back to her senses. She was very happy that Lion had suggested such a thing. The girl didn't even think she would be allowed to bring her sister. After all, her husband was ready to do anything just to make his Shasha smile. But in return, she had to continue to pamper him. The two of them bought food from a street vendor. But Shasha reminded him that a banquet was also waiting for them that evening, and Lion was supposed to talk to the Duke there. The young lady wanted to ask the Duke's permission to transfer her sister and the maid Ellie to them. Ellie was very worried about her and wanted to go north. Shasha wanted to send for them as soon as the hunting festival was over. That's why the wolf couldn't escape the banquet like a wedding. His father often looked at him with disappointment, but his wife always looked at him with warmth. At the table, Lion was the first to start a conversation about moving. The Duke understood that it was about Lexi's family. There's no need to mention the mutant in the presence of vassals. They explained that it was about a sister and a maid. The Duke agreed, because after this boy leaves, Shayla will be lonely in a foreign land. The young lady didn't understand who he was talking about. And then she realized he meant Callian. After all, he was soon turning 8, which was the age for receiving the moon's call, and many children in the cold and harsh north died at an early age. And when a child turned 8, he was considered an adult and sent to train and fight to defend the north. This only applied to boys, and it was time for Callian to go to the Hemlock Mountains. Shayla was horrified by this news. She couldn't imagine how a fragile puppy would go off to train and even fight with demons. The Duke couldn't do that to Lian. Shayla hugged him tightly and didn't want to let go, but the wolf knew that he would have to go and become a knight. After all, for the North, this was considered normal. Every man went through this, and besides, it was only for a month. Shasha yelled that he didn't know what demos were because he was even afraid of ghosts. But Lian lied to her. He had never seen ghosts, he just wanted to sleep with her. He asked her not to worry about him, because in reality, he was very brave, and he could even easily defeat a demos. But Shyla's tears flowed like a river. She was very worried about him. She asked to tell the Duke that he would not be going to serve. But boys only didn't become knights if they were very sick or cowards, and none of that applied to Callian. He wanted to become a reliable husband who could protect his wife. Shyla didn't want to listen to anything and wasn't going to let him go. The Duke asked if Shyla refused to let her husband go to the Hemlock Mountains, and she firmly replied that it was so. His Grace was very displeased with this. Shyla referred to the fact that she was his wife and had rights, but the Duke thought otherwise. This was his right, as the lord of these lands. The girl had been acting strangely since the banquet. A child who seemed so perceptive should have known about northern traditions. It frightened her that Lion was already young and weak, but would train under general conditions. But every child who was 8 years old was young and weak, but they had survived 8 northern winters and earned their place. The Duke guessed that the reason was that she had failed to make a man out of him. His appearance no longer mattered. He had already appeared throughout the Northern Territory and at the banquet, all under the name of young Lord Grey Wolf. A disgrace to their family if the Grey Wolf heir would not fight, and Shyla disgraced the name bestowed and glorified by the Duke. If she had known it would come to this, she wouldn't have gotten involved. She just wanted others to see how proud she was of Lion. Turning to the Duke, Shyla reminded him that she was also a Grey Wolf, and the lady of the house can act as the Lord's proxy. So if Callian absolutely had to go, then she asked to be allowed to go instead of him. She tried to prove to the Duke that she would work like all the boys, but he was adamant and sent her to rest in her room. Shyla was very worried that the Deimos might get to Leon. She fell to her knees before His Majesty. He saw that she was about to faint herself and called for the servants. Sandra was the first to help. She tried to calm the girl down and said that the young master wasn't leaving right now. The Duke had no idea what to do with the crying girl. It would have been easier for him to fight a Deimos. But she was a brave child. The Duke never thought she would actually suggest sending her for training. But now, she had already given up. In the room, she threw the jewelry into her bag and called Lion to follow her. She wanted them to get far away from the north before everyone woke up. Shasha was behaving very strangely, and that was bad. He asked for a chance to at least retrieve his pillow. Henry was an accomplice in this escape. They used a carriage that was meant for Ellie. Shasha chose the wrong person for this job. Henry was the Duke's spy. Well, maybe it was even better this way, because they couldn't just up and escape. But Shasha made this decision for Lion. For a girl, this was an incredible display of courage. Well, everything she did was better than losing her husband. By this time, someone might have already noticed their disappearance. It was something so bold that it shocked everyone in the ducal castle. Leon would never have done this himself. If he had never met Shasha, he would probably have been dragged to training. Shasha had done so much for him that he wanted to be brave for her. Leon was going to do his duty. After waiting for the girl to fall asleep, Henry asked what their next plan was. But Leon said they were returning to the castle. Henry will have to tell the Duke the whole truth. But Leon asked him to say that he had planned it all. He asked him to say that he was a coward who had persuaded Shasha to run away. But Henry didn't want to lie and told the young Duke to say it himself. But he couldn't, because right now, he was leaving for the mountains for training. If he saw Shasha again, his resolve might weaken. So he decided to leave a day earlier, to return a day earlier. Even if she got upset, it was a necessity, and Henry had to ensure the girl's safety, otherwise he would be in trouble. After all, before him was the future ruler of the North. Lion asked Henry for a piece of parchment, and Shasha, even in her sleep, begged him not to leave. Shyla ran down the street looking for the wolf. She was screaming and calling out to him. Suddenly, she saw a small, fluffy ball. The young lady hugged him and told him to come back. They will find a new home and everything will be all right. The girl said she would protect him no matter what. But suddenly, he disappeared again. Shyla woke up in tears, and the wolf was not in her arms again. Sandra heard all her night experiences. The girl got out of bed and started calling for Lion again. Sandra tried her best to calm her down, but the girl was sobbing and saying that she had dragged him with her, that when she opened her eyes, she was back in the ducal castle of the Grey Wolves, as if nothing had happened. Lion had disappeared and only left her a note. In the letter, he confessed his love for her and thanked her for everything she had done for him. But still, he was Grey Wolf. She herself reminded him that a wolf never runs away. Therefore, he would safely return in a month and be the husband she could be proud of. But after this letter, the girl really did get better. Her eyes were completely swollen from tears. Shayla came to the Duke again and said that as a proud northerner, she wished to see the future of the knightly order, and therefore wanted to visit the training center at least once. His Highness couldn't understand where this girl got so much persistence, because even if his wife Lucia were alive, she wouldn't have acted this way. But he sent her to mind her own business. She came to Henry and asked him to give Lion a pouch without the Duke's knowledge. She had heard that the food at the training center was terrible, and he needed to eat well. The training center was halfway up the mountain. It took 3 days to get there, and even longer if you avoided the patrol. But Shyla didn't care much about that. She just wanted Henry to deliver what she had given him. Then she changed her tune, and with eyes full of sadness, she asked Henry for a favor again. And in the end, Henry agreed to the trip, which took several days. Upon his return, he said that he hadn't been able to see Leon in person, but had heard that he had settled in and was training well. No one there hurt him. Shasha was happy to hear that, but she still felt a little sad. She wanted to send Henry again to deliver more meat. Henry understood that this pair had conspired against him. Shyla was telling herself that she needed to stay strong to meet Leon with a smile when he returned. But her anxiety didn't go away. The term was supposed to be limited to a month, but a strong fire was raging in the snowy mountains. Now the girl understood that bad premonitions never deceive. She had terrible dreams of searching for her wolf in a fire. She was haunted by a nightmare in which the entire north was engulfed in flames. But the fire on the mountain was not a dream at all. She ran to the Duke and begged him to do something, but he didn't know how to deal with this hellish inferno. After all, fire is a natural element and the will of a great god. A mere human could not oppose it. He believed he had no right to send the elite army, meant for territorial defense, there just because his son was there, even though he was his only heir. Shiloh was very worried that he might die, but his father believed that Lion had a better chance of survival there than all the others. It was said that the boy, who left in a carriage at night, arrived at the training center by dawn on the same day, which was comparable to the speed of a carrier pigeon. Therefore, worrying about him was pointless. This was the Black Wolf, destined to become the hero of the North. So they decided to wait a little longer. But the maids were discussing that the fire had been raging for several days, and that all the children in the training center had probably died. Hearing these words, she couldn't sit still. If she couldn't save him, she decided it would be better to be in the flames herself. Having turned into a rabbit, she decided to check everything for herself. The little rabbit ran through the flames, and suddenly she saw that the kingdom of Ajara had sent a legion of demons. They noticed Shayla, but thought it was just an animal, and the rabbit ran further and further. The Duke asked where the young lady had been running, but now was not the time for that inquiry. She saw everything with her own eyes. And this forest fire was not the will of the gods. A legion of Ash demons invaded them. Henry was also going to battle, and he promised to definitely bring back the young master. For several months, while she waited for Henry, hope never left her. Among her acquaintances, there was no one more courageous and strong, and only she knew the young master better than he did, so she had no doubt that he would return with Leon. Upon his return, he said that he had also seen the legion of demons, and the young master was most likely crushed by a pile of stones. The training center was burned to the ground, and the outer stone wall that Leon patrolled completely collapsed. But perhaps it was even better that way, because there was nothing more agonizing than being torn to pieces by demons or burning alive. Hearing these words, Shyla fell to her knees. She again saw herself holding a small wolf cub in her arms. And then, the cursed demons reach out their hands to him. They take Leon from her, and he helplessly begged her to save him. Hannah considered her a useless rabbit. She dreamed of her father, who blamed her for everything. Shyla woke up again, covered in sweat. She was very cold, even though it was summer outside. The young lady couldn't believe that Leon had died. She reread his last letter again. Many months had passed, and he had written that he would return in a month. Suddenly, information arrived that all women and children were ordered to leave the ducal castle. The enemy was already at the gates, and they had to flee. But Shyla firmly replied that she would not leave. The Duke was absent. Leon had not yet returned, and as the acting head of the house, she could not abandon the castle and flee. She told Sandra to leave, but Sandra couldn't abandon her. The funeral was held if a body or personal belongings were found. Lion's death was not confirmed. Shyla was supposed to be here in case he returned. After some time, the Duke and his knights returned. She asked if they had found any traces of Lion, but they returned empty-handed again. The knights sacrificed everything in the north to hold the line, but the capitals sent them untrained ignoramuses, and the Duke decided to hire mercenaries from outside. The young lady asked all the knights if they knew anything about the wolf, but no one could tell her anything. The knights no longer wanted to talk about him. He was called the Black Wolf, the savior of the north. But the prophecy and the gods lied. The Black Wolf was dead, and the north could not be saved. Henry was returning to the front because he had no choice. There was almost no one left there, even though last time he came back without an arm. The nightmares didn't stop, neither in sleep nor when awake. The war never ended, Leon didn't return, and there was no word from Henry. The war had already lasted 3 years, and one day, news arrived that Henry had died in battle. He implored one of the knights to give Milady an item. He never parted with it until the very end. Whenever there was a short break, he, as if possessed, sifted through piles of stones, claiming he had to find something. The knight handed Shayla a small package. Unwrapping it, she saw a piece of a leather collar. It was the very same bullhide collar that he had once put around Lion's neck. This is what Henry held on to until his death, and what he so stubbornly wanted to give to Shayla. It was the last memory of Lion and the last thing left of him. Now she knew that he was truly gone. If Shayla had known that the pain of loss would be so great, she would never have come north and gotten married. Somewhere in her heart, she always suspected that he had died, but she constantly clung to a faint spark of hope. The Duke was severely wounded, but he couldn't help but think of the front lines. My lady wished to visit him, and he allowed her to enter. She came to ask permission to hold Lion's funeral. On this leather rogue, Lion's most precious possession was kept, his wedding ring. But the Duke refused. He was sure his son was alive, because he had no right to die now. The father was sure that he would return to save the North with a single stroke of his blade. The Duke believed that this item was not yet proof of death. He asked to be left alone, as he needed peace. At this time, a guest arrived at the palace. Sandra recognized Lady Blanchy, but she introduced herself as Madame Piggy. She came because she heard that the Duke was not well. She knew how hard it was for Shayla, because just a few years ago, she was also a gray wolf. Blanchy suggested Shayla call her older sister. Her father was ill, and she could not stay in the capital. He never called for her since then, but she decided to stay by his side to help him recover. Blanche, with boundless devotion, cared for the Duke and managed all affairs in his domains. However, the Duke's health only faded, and he spent longer and longer in a deep slumber. And the Duke asked Shayla to arrange a funeral for him. Lion's funeral was modest and private. Shasha asked him not to grieve, so that few people would gather, because there was already much sorrow in the north. And the young Duke's wife threw the remains of his collar into the fire. So she said goodbye to her dear wolf cub. She hoped that he was now frolicking carefree in the hemlock valleys. She asked him not to cry or be sad, because they would all see each other anyway. Shayla returned to her room. She went out onto the balcony. Blanchy was straightening the curtains in the Duke's room at this time. Suddenly, Shayla heard someone enter the room. Two unfamiliar men said that she was going with them. It was Viscount Rosen and Baron Adolf. At the Council of Vassals, it was decided to escort the young Duchess to another location. Sandra screamed that they couldn't do that because the lady was supposed to stay in the ancestral castle. They were taking her to an unknown place. It was the royal monastery. But, in essence, it turned out to be a dungeon, because the widow is a sinner who ruined her husband. However, stubbornly clinging to life, she only becomes a burden, depleting the wealth of the family. The Council of the Grey Wolves' vassals decided to eliminate the worthless and inconspicuous young Duchess by exiling her to a monastery. Shayla was very tired and didn't understand why she was there and why all this had happened to her. On that very day, she was simply going to jump off the balcony. Now she saw Leon again, and as long as he was with her, she didn't care about anything. And so, several long years passed. Suddenly, a young man came to her and said that he was Callion. But she didn't believe him, because Lion always called her Shasha, not Shayla. Her puppy would never have made such an ugly smirk. This man cannot be her Leon, and her puppy died a long time ago. Emily reminded her of the story of Countess Max. A handsome man used to visit her, introducing himself as Count Max. The Countess believed him, and recently she passed away after drinking poisoned tea. Shayla was in the same situation, and she wouldn't want to hear such news about her. Shayla decided she wouldn't give anything to some scoundrel who dared to pretend to be her lion, and wrote her last will. The imposters wouldn't give up. New fakes kept appearing, calling themselves Callion. But the more she spoke, the more precisely they adjusted their words and actions. It was a mistake from the very beginning to deal with them at all, but she still clung to the faint hope that one of them would turn out to be the real Leon. But she had almost nothing left to lose, and in her will, she asked that at the right time, all her belongings and assets be gathered and burned in the town square, and whatever didn't burn be given to the orphanage. In monastic isolation, she was cut off from any outside information. Amidst this chaos, all she could do was simply endure. And when she came to her senses, she was already standing at the gallows. The crowd chanted for her to be finished off quickly. Shayla couldn't understand what they were saying, or why she had been brought here. The crowd was saying that she was the cause of the duchy's collapse, which is why they called her a shameless rabbit. Not only did she ruin her husband, but she was also a harlot. The accusation against Shyla Greywolf began to be read. Having committed adultery with a single man while being a widow, she was guilty of no small sin. Not only did she betray her husband, she stole his inheritance and stained the honor of both families, and also brought a curse upon Duke Greywolf, leading him to his demise. But she was confined to a monastery and could do nothing wrong. For these deeds, she was sentenced to death. To accept such a death surely meant the sin of not protecting Hannah, Lion, and her sister. But what she was accused of were not her crimes. When only a few seconds remained until the execution of the sentence, someone shouted to immediately stop the process. Someone shouted that the Black Wolf had returned. One of the knights proclaimed that before them stood the direct heir of Duke Greywolf, the protector of Hemlock, the sacred blade of freedom, the Black Wolf of the Empire. This was Shyla Greywolf's husband, Callian Greywolf. The executioner didn't believe them, because if these were Greywolf's knights, they should have entered the capital as part of a triumphal procession. But who cared about parades now? He furiously shouted for them to stop this trial. The Black Wolf tried to find out who dared to accuse his wife. Shyla thought she heard a familiar, long-forgotten name. The Black Wolf stood before her and called her Shasha. He hugged her tightly, but she didn't understand what was happening. The knight asked if she recognized him. He said he was her lion. After all, he had promised her he would return and missed her very much. At that moment, she realized that this time, these scammers had truly decided to go all out. Shyla lay on her bed, trying to understand how she had survived. And she remembered the man in the square. He was upset that she didn't recognize him. It was a mistake to discuss Lion with those crooks. Now they've become completely brazen. They waited for the moment when Shyla would be on the verge of death and out of her mind. In such a case, it would have been unthinkable to refuse someone who called himself Leon the Savior. It was strange where they found such a handsome actor. But one could not lose a clear mind. Leon's name and her share of the inheritance are all she has left, and all she must protect. Outside the room, someone was loudly saying that, according to the agreement with His Majesty, a triumphal procession must take place first. By custom, one cannot enter the capital before it. Later, she heard a knock at the window. Displeased, Shyla jumped out of bed, and she saw the very same man from the square. Out of surprise, she fell, and he asked if she was all right. Shyla could smell the blood coming from him, the smell of iron, the stench of war. He had indeed come from the battlefield. And he spoke of how much he missed his Shasha. He had enormous hands, and he could easily crush her. But Shyla asked him to step away. The knight tried to find out what had happened to her. Everything around them had truly changed, but she should have recognized his eyes. The shade was definitely similar, but it was a brazen gaze, full of unwavering confidence in his power. Shyla still couldn't believe that he could be her puppy. Lion didn't understand how she couldn't recognize him. Seizing the opportune moment, Shyla grabbed the heavy candlestick lying under the bed, but he stopped her with his bare hands. Lion asked why she was doing that, as it was very dangerous. Until now, every time she met imposters, she would get angry and drive them away, ignore and avoid them. This man was impersonating Lion with such audacity. If things didn't go his way, he could easily finish her off. Shyla addressed him by name and said that he was now her husband. But first, he suggested they just talk and discuss many things. First, he looked around the room she was in. He was outraged that his Shasha had been placed in such terrible conditions. Shyla felt as if she was watching a one-act play. This actor is about to take over the Grey Wolf family and become a powerful ruler of the North. If everyone believes he is the rightful duke, then that will be the truth. Shyla asked him to get off the bed. He did it immediately, but then remembered that they used to even sleep together sometimes. Lion asked if that was how she wanted to see him, because she had said that she didn't like overly muscular bodies, and he had toned down a bit. Perhaps that was his basic build, but he wouldn't become more graceful. Shayla remembered that conversation where she told her puppy that she didn't like bodybuilders. Lion said that he had written her many letters, but she had never replied to him. The girl quietly said that she hadn't received anything. If he really is her husband, then he must have a lot of questions for her. After all, he met his wife after 15 years, and she immediately appeared in court for adultery. Perhaps he should have asked about the other man, and whether there was any adultery at all. He looked at her and realized that he seemed like a stranger to her. Lion apologized for scaring her and decided to go back out through the window. But after a second's hesitation, he asked if he could count on a little kiss. Or maybe they could at least hug. But Shayla looked at him as if he were a scoundrel harassing women. Thinking that one day she might be able to leave the monastery, the girl avoided taking vows as a nun. Otherwise, all the property left in her name would have gone to the monastery. She thought that perhaps this man was trying to get her out of the monastery walls. Meanwhile, Leona was awaited at the Grey Wolf Knights' camp. One of the knights asked how Callian had met with his wife. When the conversation turned to wives, he would talk endlessly about his Shasha. King Aji Helgot was defeated, and the Legion of Demos, sensing their rout, retreated from the front lines. This war seemed eternal, but it ended with the victory of the Grey Wolves' order. Lion joyfully rushed back, hoping to meet his Shasha. He imagined how she would recognize him immediately. Leon was sure that his wife was not capable of such crimes. She didn't greet him with open arms, didn't comfort him for all his hardships, but looked at him like a stranger and a shameless scoundrel. But even at that moment, she was beautiful to him. In 12 years at the monastery, Shyla had never seen the Mother Superior, but today she had summoned her. She reported that the girl's husband was vehemently opposing the monastery and the High Temple due to the conditions of her confinement. During all this time, the girl hadn't even had the opportunity to contact anyone outside. She couldn't learn anything about what interested her. She wanted to know how the war had ended, if Duke Greywolf had recovered from his illness, if Count Lexi still lived as dishonorably, and if her sister was still imprisoned in the basement. In essence, she didn't even know what was happening with her trial, and even less did she know what some swindler, impersonating her husband, was doing. It turns out he burst into the monastery in army boots, grabbed the abbess by the collar, and started threatening her. He even threatened to immediately expel the nuns. Shyla decided it was time for extreme measures and said she wanted to become a nun. But she strongly wanted the girl to first understand the situation they were in, because Lord Greywolf had defied the sacred decree and entered the capital with his knights, interrupting the court. His army had pushed back the demonic legion. He possessed the most powerful military force in the empire. No one could stop him. The Greywolf Knights, who had arrived from the distant north, intermingled with foreign mercenaries, were heroes, but at the same time, an alien force. And their existence was very irritating to the Emperor. The Emperor was already gathering his forces, and Shyla hardly wanted bloodshed in the capital. But if they win, he can become Emperor. Shyla was strongly advised to find out if her husband was already in the north, and their monastery was no longer able to ensure her safety. They were going to return her as her husband demanded. She managed to negotiate with the abbess to stay here for 2 more days. But in return, she asked them to say that the monastery had never oppressed her or starved her, and then they gave her everything they had. Emily was the only one in the monastery whom Shyla could call a friend, so she suggested they share their last meal together. Shyla worried that even if she returned north, the scoundrels who put her there would still be around. And would Greywolf's castle be as she remembered it? Shasha asked her friend to send a letter to Lexi's estate through her acquaintances. But Emily said that for such a request, it would have been easier for her to turn to Father Nicholas, because she thought that he was the one with whom she had committed adultery. Nicholas was a pervert who liked to harass the ladies in the monastery, but the mere thought of being involved with him was worse than being condemned for adultery. Although it turned out that this pervert was already in prison. Shyla remembered that her Leon was timid and whiny, and even if he had managed to become human, he probably wouldn't have grown up like that. Suddenly, she heard his voice outside the window again. He shouted that he almost fell, and if he had fallen from such a height, he could have died. And Shasha opened the window. He decided that she was still worried about him. Pulling away from him, she asked why he had appeared again in the middle of the night. He had simply heard that she wanted to become a nun, but he didn't understand why she needed to, since he had returned. Shyla explained that the inheritance of the dukedom should proceed without problems, and without her, although his reputation would probably suffer a little. Lion was surprised that his wife thought he had come here for the inheritance. Shyla insistently asked for proof that he was indeed Callion. Now he understood that she had been avoiding him all this time because she had mistaken him for a fake. He took a ring hanging on a leather cord from under his shirt. He had long lost the leather collar, but continued to wear it around his neck, and Shyla recognized the ring she had chosen herself. But she needed to keep her composure, because it was possible this man had found the ring in the thick of battle and claimed it for himself. Or he could have ordered a copy from a jeweler. Now Lion realized he had been very overconfident, believing his wife would recognize him at first glance. Now the girl suggested that he answer her questions. The first was to name the place where he first peed. Only the real Lion could know the answer to this question, but he shouted that he didn't know the answers to these questions. Now she started asking questions about washing, but he interrupted her and said that he now washes several times a day and is not smelly at all. She wanted him to state the number of years he hadn't washed, but he said he no longer remembered such a thing. Then she remembered how the puppy cried while eating garlic. He was supposed to state the number of cloves he had eaten. Leon asked her to stop reminiscing about the past. He knew perfectly well that he had acted like an idiot back then, only causing Shasha suffering and being of no use to her. But now, everything was different, and he would never make her suffer again. Memories of those priceless moments from the past still kept the girl in this world. She asked him never to insult the Leon of her childhood again, because for her, he was the most reliable and honest husband in the world. Shyla asked to be shown one favor. She asked to get Father Nicholas out of prison. After all, they didn't commit adultery or anything like that. He was unfairly dragged into all of this because of her. If Shayla had grown fond of the monastery, he was ready to build one for her in the north. But no matter what, he offered the girl to return north together. The guy kept trying to touch her anyway, but she couldn't stand it. She already thought she would be imprisoned in that monastery, but she managed to escape quite easily. While that imposter thought he would meet her in 2 days, she decided to escape now. And she ordered the